A very good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's workshop on peer assessment. Today, we're going to be focusing on natural sciences and biology-related courses. We have a great set of speakers with us today who are going to be talking about their experience with peer assessment techniques and yeah, they've been critic users for a year now, so we want to hear from them how they use critic and how they have benefited from peer assessment. So let me introduce you to our panelists. We have Professor Mary-Helen Armour from York University. She's been using critic for in I think 3 of her courses. Correct me if I'm wrong.
The last 2 years.
Yeah, okay. And she has her class sizes vary from like small classes to large classes of about 200 students. So we will be able to get a diverse perspective on how she uses critic and how her students how it has helped her students better their learning experience. We are also joined by Professor Andreas Hyland from the University of Guelph. He has been using critic for 2 of his courses, developmental biology and integrative biology of invertebrates. So, and his classes are also large classes, 100 plus students. So we will be able to get a nice diverse perspective on, how critic works for small classes as well as large classes. And my name is Preeti. I'm here at Critic. I help with the content marketing. And I'm joined by my colleague Dirk, who has his camera off because he's having some internet issues, but he will be able to respond to your messages on chat, and he will be also running a short demo of the Critic platform. This is going to be a 1-hour session. It's going to be recorded, and we will be sharing the recording and the slide deck with you at the end of the presentation. To just talk quickly about the agenda, it's going to be very conversational. We just want to hear from our panelists' experience of peer assessment techniques, some best practices that they have used in their classes and have seen success with it. And like I said, Dirk will be running a live demo, and then we will get into a little more deep conversation about peer assessment with some activity examples from their courses. Just to show you all the different stages and how they use the platform, and this will be followed by a 15 minutes audience. We will be dedicating the last 15 minutes of the session to audience questions. So please feel free to either wait till the end of the session, or you could use the chat option on Zoom to post your questions, and we can answer those questions as they become relevant in the discussion, or we could take them at the end of the session. So with that, I would like to start it off and open up the floor to, let me start with you, Professor Hyland. Could you talk about how and why you decided to use peer assessment in your classes?
Sure. So we actually had a peer review system in one of our courses before I started using Critic. So it was actually a system that was I think developed at the University of Guelph, and we found it very useful. We used it more for lab reports, where the students could basically provide each other feedback on a draft version of the lab report, and basically improve their writing and content in response to those evaluations. And so when I heard, I knew that it can be effective in terms of teaching, and when I heard about Critic, I tried it out the first semester, because I think one of the advantages is that it allows students to really see what other students can produce, like what other students can be, how they answer the questions, and then by seeing that, the students tend to be more involved, and they see it, they they change the way they look at the assignment and complete the assignments. So that sort of was my experience with these assessments. And so I was willing to try it, and you know, one of the things that stood out for me with Critic was that it was much easier to use, and it was more easier to implement in my course.
Okay. And what about your experience, Professor Armour? You've been a very big advocate of Critic, so we would like to hear.
Yeah, so I had been trying to use peer assessment. I tried it both in a third-year level course and my introductory level courses that are sort of general science courses that I teach. And I was doing it through the Moodle platform, which was extremely clunky and frustrating. And I could see the value of the peer assessment, but the whole interface was really unfortunate. So I had experimented with a number of times. So when I found out about Critic, I don't remember exactly how, I decided it might be a good match because a lot of my teaching even prior to the pandemic had been switching to online course development. And one of the real big problems with online course development is the students don't have a lot of interaction because I do everything asynchronously. The idea is to kind of, you know, allow the students to progress at their own pace. That's sort of the idea of the perpetual course model is, you know, all the materials there and they can sort of progress through at their own pace. So in order to give them sort of some contact with their peers, this seemed to really meet the need of being able to see what their peers are doing, get a sense of what their peer was, grade their peers, and also sort of improve their feedback. And I, right from the first time I used it, I had a very experienced TA, luckily, who was helping me with this. And she said, you really notice from start to finish, because I did a number of smaller assessments. I think I did 10 smaller assessments. You could really see from the beginning of the year to the end of the year how much the student work had improved, and how even the comments from the students on, you know, like what they recognized their peers needed to improve, how that improved over the year. And I think especially for the first year students, because I'm teaching a general science, I've got a very diverse student body, that kind of soft skill of being able to see other people's work and assess other people's work and then take back the feedback to improve, I think was a huge thing, because soft skills are becoming a very big thing that employers are looking for. So I think in that sense, it was very helpful. I mean, it improved the quality of their work too, but I think to some extent, the soft skill aspect was very big as well.
So basically, that's like the giving and receiving feedback. Yeah.
And being able to improve your work based on that feedback, not just taking the feedback and just doing the feedback, but also recognizing from other people's work how you could improve your own. And a lot of students express the same thing that Andreas mentioned, that they really like seeing other students' work to be able to give them different ideas and different sort of ways to think about it.
And that's something that we've heard from other instructors as well. Of course, when you teach large classes, giving feedback on time is something that may not be possible unless you have enough TA support. But a lot of instructors do appreciate that turnaround time on the personalized feedback is much quicker. And I'll show you some numbers after this slide. But that's something that they've spoken about. You've spoken about the peer-to-peer learning, how students really like to see each other's work to, you know, learn from it, and then of course build from that, and then make the next submission progressively better. And of course, in terms of like an online environment, like this is a great way to improve student engagement. And since how Critic works is it's all anonymous, students are not able to see whose assignment they're grading and all of that. So it's completely bias free. So you don't really know whose work you're looking at. So, you know, you're not going in with any preconceived notions. And of course, in a subject like what you both teach, it's very complex, and I think learning from each other really helps with concept reinforcement. And just to tie it all together, the instructor doesn't lose control of any of this process. Like they have full control over it, because the final grade does lie with the instructor. So they have insights on how many students completed the evaluation and the feedback, and they have full control over all sorts of things. When grading disputes happen, they can go in and check what the issue was and resolve it there. So that's those were just some benefits that you both shared with us. These are some numbers that I pulled up from your courses. Just want to share with my audience, we have about, you teach a big range, so 15 to 200 students, which comes out to about 522 submissions that need grading, and you assign about four evaluations per assignment per student. So and then it takes about 8 days for students to get that personalized, timely feedback, and about 70% of the students complete the evaluation. And the average grade dispute rate is about 1.54%, and which is pretty less, because usually critic instructors, the average that we see is about 2 to 4%. So this is well below the average. For your course, Professor Hyland, you teach large courses. I saw there were about 100 plus students, about 180 students per course, which translates to about 1,000 submissions that need grading, and you assign about 5 evaluations per student, and the turnaround time in your activities is about 3.8 days, and 90% of your students complete the evaluation. And again, the average grade dispute rate is much lower than the critic average, about 1.11%. So with those numbers, I would like to pass on the screen sharing to my colleague Dirk, who will be taking us through the critic platform, and just have more insight on that.
Perfect. Are you able to hear me, Preeti? Awesome. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, camera's off, having some internet issues, but thank you all for joining today, and just wanted to kind of take you guys through the functionality of the platform, because you're going to hear obviously our guest professors talk about a lot of the benefits, but just as far as how it actually works, I will take you guys through that. So this is kind of the life cycle of any standard critic activity. You're going to pass through all these different phases on any activity that your students do. So I just want to turn your attention to the create, evaluate, and feedback phases first, because those are the main 3 that are going to be standard on any critic assignment. So the create, essentially students would log on to the platform. They would see the activity instructions, the rubric, they get to see the schedule, and they kind of know how much time they have to complete the project. And the create phase, this is where the actual curriculum is covered, whatever kind of learning outcome is needed in the course, whether that's an essay or a video or a PowerPoint or whatever you want to have your students do. They would log on and create that submission. They would then go back on in a few days for the evaluation phase. So at this point, they're no longer able to edit or access their creation. Well, they can access it, but they can't edit it. Instead, they are presented with, anonymous peer creation 1, anonymous peer creation 2, anonymous peer creation 3. So however many the instructor has kind of assigned the students to get. We saw that in Professor Armour's class, I think it was 4, and then Professor Hyland's class, it was 5. So that depends kind of on the duration that they might take, or the just the commitment level to the evaluations. So students would then log on, they see their peer creations for them to evaluate. So they would go through the rubric item, determine how good it is based on qualitative and quantitative factors, assign a grade, and then leave some pretty good written comments as well. And these written comments are really important. Obviously, the grade is important, but what the students write, this is kind of what we're trying to teach them, the pedagogical values we want them to learn, giving, receiving, interacting with critical feedback. So the grade is one thing, but the comments that they give are actually going to be more important moving forward when we get to the feedback stage. So this is the kind of 360-degree feedback. We call it closing the loop. So, the student that submitted their initial creation, they receive their evaluations from their peers. And then in the feedback stage, they actually have the chance to go full circle and give feedback to the people who evaluated them to help them improve on their evaluation abilities. So they'll let them know how motivational it was, how critical it was, how it can be improved, how they actually perceived it, and if it was helpful. So that's kind of the end goal, is really improving students' evaluation abilities. So before we even do any of these sort of 3 phases in your standard critic activity, you're going to want to get your students calibrated. So we've got this calibration activity over here, calibrate your students' grading power for grade accuracy. So essentially what this does is it just ensures that your students' grading power is consistent to what you would give as a professor. We know that not all students are going to be top level evaluators right from the start. And as you saw here with the feedback comments, that's kind of the goal throughout the semester, to improve their evaluation abilities. But at the start, we know that some students are going to be great, some students are still going to be improving. So we want to make sure that everyone is kind of benchmarked fairly. So what you can do is upload a already completed assignment. You can give it, you go through the rubric line by line to assign it a grade value. And then your students log on to Critic and they complete the same evaluation that you just did. And our AI essentially compares the grade that they gave to the grade that you gave. And it starts them off with a certain amount of grading power. So there's 6 different levels of grading power, 1 star being a beginner all the way up to a virtuoso at 6 stars. And someone who's a virtuoso level evaluator, their grade that they give is going to count 6 times more than someone who's only got 1 star. So this ensures that all students are going to be able to participate in all of the phases of the activity. They're going to have their voices heard, but the students who are stronger level evaluators, their grades are going to come to the forefront more. So professors can kind of rest assured knowing that every student in the class is getting an equal chance to participate, although the grades are going to be fairly accurate and consistent to what you would actually give us a professor, because your strongest students' grades are the ones that come to the forefront. And throughout the semester, your grading power can increase or decrease depending on how accurately you grade. So it's going to be compared every time you do an evaluation, it gets compared to the end mark that the creation receives, as well as the feedback comments. So you got to make sure you're leaving good, critical, motivational comments. The activity setup, so we've got lots of instructional designers that can work with you to kind of give you tips and tricks and ideas for setting up the activities. And then it kind of goes through the 3 phases. So the create, evaluate, and feedback phase. And then it enters the grading phase. So at this point, the students are actually done everything. Nothing else required for them to do. This is just for the professor. You guys have a chance to go on. You can spotlight anything, spot check stuff. So you get to see all the creations, evaluations, feedback, resolve disputes, resolve flags. You guys can overwrite any grades. You guys actually have the last say kind of in what grades submissions receive. So you can give professor grades. So just kind of your last chance, have an overview of everything. And then you can mark the activity as complete, at which point it would get synced up with LMS. Students are able to log onto their LMS and they would see the mark on there kind of as being finalized. So that is the kind of overview of how it works. I'm just going to quickly hop into the platform to show you what it looks like in here. So this is what a Critic account looks like on the student's end. So you can see here, this is where all the active courses would be. You can just click in there. It opens right up on the activities page right away. They're also able to see the course info here, so they can see their professor, any of their TAs, as well as how they're being scored. So I mentioned earlier that, every phase of a Critic assignment is going to be important. It's not just, students can do the creation and then forget about it. They're being marked on throughout the assignment. So on all 3 phases. So these grades here, we kind of suggest this 50, 40, and 10% breakdown. That's all customizable on the professor's end. So 50% for the creation, 40% for the evaluation, 10% on the feedback. And as you see here, the evaluation score, it's actually broken down into 2 parts. So half of it is how accurately did the student grade compared to other top level evaluators. And then the other part is the feedback score. So were you actually leaving good comments? There's also a discussion board over here. So students are able to kind of open discussions up with the rest of the class, just general discussions. But back to the activities page here, you're kind of able to see the class average at the top. That's something that can be enabled or disabled on the professor end. Spotlighted content right here. So I can see my professor spotlighted this creation for being innovative, this creation for being authentic. So I can click into that. I can view the creation, see why they've spotlighted it, any comments that have been left, the assignment it came from, et cetera, et cetera. Below that, this is where your current activities are going to live. There's also like little things like these, which are just articles we've created, YouTube videos to kind of help get students started. Here's the current activities, the past activities down here. But essentially, a student would log on to Critic. They would see, okay, I've got an activity that's in the create phase. I can see it's due in 3 years. So this would be counting down up until the due date, as well as, we'd send them an email and a text notification to let them know. You can click into the activity there. So you see the activities here, any resources the professors provided, the full rubric, the schedule as well. And then this rubric, you can actually click to expand it. So more details here. So kind of no hidden agenda. Students know what's expected of them right from the get-go. Back to here. So then they're going to read the activity instructions, look at the resources, look at the rubric, and then they can come down here and actually start creating their initial submission. So like I mentioned, more videos to kind of just get the students started. They're able to make a text submission here, include any links they want. They can actually attach file. So depending on what kind of submissions you've allowed on your end, that'll determine what kind of submission students can submit. But very versatile platform in terms of videos, lots of links, stuff like that can be submitted. So they'll work through, save and submit. They're actually able to edit their creation at any time up until the due date. But as you can see, they're not able to access evaluations yet. They're not able to access the feedback yet. They have to wait until those phases start. So they would then log back onto the platform in a couple days. They'd see the evaluation phase. They're still able to access the activity details, the full rubric. The only difference now, they're not able to edit their creation. Instead, they see anonymous peer creation 1, anonymous peer creation 2, anonymous peer creation 3. So what they need to do is go through the rubric, assign a grade to each of the different items. So they'll read their peers creation here, determine, they'll kind of go, back and forth with the rubric, see how they think they did, give whatever grades they thought, select criteria that can be improved or they did well on, and then leave a written evaluation. So as you can see here, I've left my written evaluation. My comments and the star values, so I can press save and submit. That's something that I'll need to now do for kind of all 3 of the evaluations that I have here. And once I complete all of the evaluations,
Dirk, your voice is breaking up. Not sure if you can. Do you want to stop screen sharing? Yeah. Oh. I think we lost Dirk, but he will. Is he there? Sorry about that. I think we lost Dirk there. I'll wait for him to join in a little bit, but maybe we could go ahead with our discussion. And if anybody has any questions on the Critic platform, please feel free to ask your question.
Oh yeah, hi. So just to be clear, I got the impression from listening to Dirk that if you have 100 students submitting an assignment, and after all of the other students, the peers and so on, have reviewed them, submitted their reviews, you have to go and grade the original 100 assignments and all of the peer reviews of those assignments. Is that right? So in other words, if you have 5 peers reviewing every assignment, you've got like 500 peer reviews review plus the 100 assignments. Have I got that right, or am I just imagining that?
No, you don't have to go and grade all the assignments. The students are getting the 5 different perspectives on the assignment, and all you got to do is you can just look at them just to see if everything looks okay. You don't need to go into each and every assignment to see if everything is okay. And basically you just you just see a overall how everything looks, and then finalize the grade. If students feel that there is a discrepancy, if they are not happy with the feedback they have received, then there is a grade dispute option that comes up in front of the student's name. There's a flag that comes up, you get a notification. So all you got to do is just go and resolve those comments. You also have the option to grade a few assignments if you want to. It's not compulsory. I know Professor Armour's course, Professor Armour's course, she did show some instructor graded. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so you don't, the system and the AI kind of takes care of a lot of that. What I typically have done is I have my TAs, because I have 200, 250 plus students. instead of having my TAs mark all of them, I just have them go through and I tell each of them to, out of the 200, spot check 5 or 6, just randomly. And the AI, because it takes the TAs as the best grade, then kind of brings it all back into line and uses that as its basis for comparison. So I either have the TAs sort of spot check all the way through, or I will have them grade the first assignment, say the 4th assignment and the 8th assignment out of 12. And then the AI takes the TA as the ideal one, compares the student grades to it, and then sort of adjusts it accordingly. So I don't have to mark everything. The TAs don't have to mark everything. It's actually a very efficient system that way, because the AI does all the comparison in the background, right? So if I have my TAs either randomly spot check or mark every sort of 3rd or 4th assignment, the marking quality is still there, but they don't have to mark everything. And then my TAs, I can use their time a little more effectively to do more sort of tutorial or one-on-one questions or that kind of thing, rather than just having to do a lot of marking. But the students still get a lot of really good feedback in the end.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Great. So I'm not sure Dirk is going to rejoin because he's showing offline, but we'll continue with our discussion and see if he's able to join after. Just wanted to start off by asking you both how your role has evolved as an educator with when you're using peer assessment. Let's start with you, Professor Hyland.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, for me, the biggest challenge, you know, as a professor of a relatively large course in 3rd year, is that the material is complex. Like there's really a lot of complexity in the material, and you know, I have due to the class size, I have limitations in terms of how I can get a better understanding of what students actually understand and what they don't understand. So there's sort of like there's a natural limitation in terms of what can be done in courses like that. And so we use multiple choice questions for some aspects of the course, but we also typically have things like short or long answer questions on the exam that are really trying to dig a little bit into these more complex issues of the material that simply can't be done easily with multiple choice questions. Like it's a very, very different way. And to test students' understanding and comprehension. And what I found is that peer assessment forces the students to really think critically through the material and really kind of prepare their answers. So I think it's sort of like they get a lot of practice through Critic to actually answer sort of long answer questions in my case. And that's really how I've been using Critic mostly, where they can maybe spend an hour or so, an hour to 2 hours per assignment. So it's not a hugely onerous amount of work, but it gives them the opportunity to really think deeper about the material and test their comprehension of the material. In addition to that, you know, working with other students, at least indirectly, where they get the feedback, you know, that sort of allows me to step back a little bit and really see where what works and what doesn't work. So it really has sort of helped me deal with that comprehension problem, I think, quite significantly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, and what about you, Professor Armour? How do you use Critic for your courses, and like how has it helped?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is the courses I'm using it in are basically first-year courses. So these students come in with a lot of deficits, shall we say, very mixed bag of skills. So what I've really been able to do with this one, particularly since my courses are pretty much all online now, is the students submit sort of a series of smaller assignments Generally, the answers are meant to be 200 to 300 words. They're a mix of sort of research or application or read an article and summarize. A lot of these skills that they need. Because I am a gen ed course, it's not specific content that they're trying to learn, but as much about how to look at science and evaluate science, as well as the content. So with the critic, for each sort of topic I give them a short critic where you're now looking at getting to those higher levels of thinking or being able to apply it. And because they now peer assess, it makes it more of a collaborative kind of thing. And I think it's very, very useful because they also sort of see different perspectives on how to answer a question. And it allows them to do more smaller assignments, more smaller assessments. I no longer have final exams in my courses. I've entirely done away with that, particularly in the online environment. It took the educational development a while to convince me to do that. But I think the critic really helped because now I can get this sort of continuous evaluation going. And by, it's like I said, having the TAs do the quality checks and stuff, it is actually working fairly well as a way to get them to sort of think about the material and apply the material and come to understand it both as science and the science in the context as well.
And both of you teach like the different levels and classes. So how do you think like first year students, like how are they are they ready for peer assessment, and how do you prepare them for peer assessment versus like senior students in like third year, fourth year kind of classes? Like what has been your experience, introducing peer assessment to both of them?
So, I mean, I think it definitely requires some work, like it, because there's concerns and ideas about what peer assessment is that might not be entirely correct. Like, so for example, one concern that a lot of students have is that basically we're not doing any grading and they have to do the grading for each other instead. So I found explaining it to the students in sort of a clear fashion what the purpose is of peer assessment and what the advantages are, the benefits are, really helps. I also give the students typically a sort of protocol, for lack of better words, of how to address a question. So step by step, we, for example, include a lot of primary literature searches in third year courses where they have to read aspects of a published paper that they didn't have to comment on. So that's quite challenging. And so I kind of walk them through it initially and try to explain to them how they can best address a question systematically. And so that I found that to be those kind of strategies to be useful and really help the students to kind of lose a little bit at least of these concerns and the fear about the system.
Okay. And your experience, Professor Armour?
I think in the first year classes I have, the biggest problem is they all want to be generous, so they help each other out. And then when the TAs regrade it, they get a rude shock. and I warn them ahead of time that, giving your peers a high grade is not necessarily the best thing. The point of this is to learn and to give constructive criticism. And I go into a discussion of what constructive criticism is, and what are the points they really need to bring out. I mean, I tell them, like, you should tell your peers what they did well, what they did poorly, and what they didn't do and they probably should have. Like I said, you got to focus on those three things, and that's where you want to sort of focus your comments, which is sort of a very useful structure for these first year students who may not have any clue. That's also why typically I have the TAs go through and mark the whole first assignment. I say, okay, after the first assignment, compare your grading to what the TA did, and you'll get a sense of, what am I doing wrong? And a lot of it is just by experience. Like I give them an outline and sort of expectations, but I think it's actually through the repeated process that they really do the learning. And I strangely enough, from very few, I have hardly ever heard that complaint about, well, you're doing the grading for us, but they understand the TAs have regraded the first one and then grade other ones right from the get-go. So I'm like, this is as much about you learning to grade. This is much about you being able to see your peers work and get sort of other perspectives So I've had very little pushback on, or very little commentary about the, well, you're getting someone else to do your work, because that just doesn't seem to come up. And it's like I said, I try to explain to them what's going on. And even with the grade disputes, I find the bulk of the disputes I have are just ones where they didn't like a particular comment or they thought it was unfair. And when I explain, no, that's a good comment because of this, this, and this, that ends it. I think I've only once or twice actually had a student get really, really frustrated with it and go on once I explain, no, you know, like, and sometimes it's sort of like, a lot of the assignments I do, they don't have a particular right answer. So it's kind of a case of, yeah, different peers will give you different feedback. So you can sort of take that and go, okay, what can I do to improve next time? How does this give me a different perspective on how to do this assignment too?
And do you like have activities where you show students like how to give constructive feedback? Like, is there some kind of expectation you set with students? Like students,
yes and no. Like I give them examples of the kind of comments I'd expect them to give, but in some ways I want them to take their own perspective on it. I don't want to bias them in the first way, in by giving too much instruction, bias them into what they're supposed to be looking for. I want them to, like, okay, think in terms of how do you think you could make this assignment better, right? How could this student have improved? And I don't necessarily want to bias them with my opinion too much. So like give them a bit of a broad overview of what I'm looking for. I give them, they have the rubric, but I also give them a marking key of they should have this point, they should have this point, they should have this point. They don't necessarily have to all of them, but these are what I want to see. I want to see like the clear writing and stuff. So I avoid actually giving too much structure because that would limit them. And part of the point of an exercise like this is getting diversity from your peers.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm just curious what proportion of the course grade is determined by the critic participation? And second question is, can you or do you integrate the critic output, the grades, I guess, in any way with any other, like at Guelph, Course Link, or whatever other course software students might be familiar with, or you might be using for managing courses? So 2 questions there.
Yeah.
Sure. So your first question is, would you like to answer your first question, Professor Armour or Dr. Hyland?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's the next point actually in our discussion. So the course weight, the way I do it is I set it at 20% of the final grade. So I make it somewhat equivalent to a midterm exam and have actually removed the midterm exam for that reason. So I only have a final exam, I have critic, and I have sort of weekly lab quizzes or quizzes of the material. So I do that, and I think it was in discussion with people from critic. I think it has to have a certain value. If the weight is too low, it just doesn't work. And you also have to be able to. So I do 5 assignments, like Piri was saying, throughout the semester. So then each assignment is worth 4%. And that's really seems to work quite well. It gives them enough motivation to really put the work into it. I think if I would go lower, that wouldn't necessarily work that well. It would become sort of like a throwaway grade. Like if I would go as low as 10% or 15% even.
We recommend 50, 40, 10 as the 3 stages weightage creation, 50%, 40% evaluation, and the feedback on feedback to be 10%. But you can, we have seen instructors, play with that from the beginning of the course. You could, if you feel that that's too much, 40%, then you could reduce that. And as you progress through the course, you could increase that as well for your activity. So we've seen that as well. And your second question was with regards to the type of course?
No, it was about integrating with other course software that you might be using.
like LMS, like LMSs?
Like D2L or like
Yeah.
whatever students log in, they see all their courses, they see their grades, see their assignments, see
Yeah.
bulletins from the professor, etc.
So we do, Critic does integrate with Moodle, LMS, with Moodle, D2L, Canvas, Blackboard, and all these major LMS platforms. It's not a direct plug and play kind of thing. Our dev team needs to work with your team to, kind of set it up for you, with your admin team to set it up for you. But yes, you could also use it as a standalone. But a lot of profs prefer to have everything under one system. If you're using D2L, then there's a small Critic icon which will pop up in your D2L dashboard.
Yeah. The other thing is York did not have it integrated the last 2 years because it was but you can just take the link for each assignment and put them right in the LMS. So I was just copying the link from Critic and putting it in. The only headache at the end then is transferring the grades over, which has been a little bit of work, but I've done it in other software too. But I think York is supposed to be integrating this year, so that will take it away. But I was kind of one of the early adopters, so I had to go through the growing pains. But I agree with Andreas. I tend to set it about 20–25% of the value of the course. I do several activities. The other thing actually I've done with it is my students have like a major project at the end of their course that they have to submit. And what I've done with the Critic is I set up sort of separate subgroups and I have them write outlines, and then they get peer feedback on their outlines, right? That one's just a participation activity. I give them a couple of % of the final, of the course as a grade to do it. But this also gives them feedback before they do that sort of final major submission. So instead of a final exam, I have sort of a final graded major project. And what I have them do is at a certain point in the course, it's like, okay, well, this is what your project is going to be about. Write a short outline of, 300 words or whatever, which are proper citations and everything. And then the peers get to grade it. And the other thing is it also gives peers other ideas of what they can add into their final major project. So it's kind of a sharing activity. And I find that's actually worked really well too, to give some boosts to the final product and let them get some sort of feedback halfway through on, are you actually going the right direction with the kind of thing you're supposed to be doing? But you have to give them at least a little participation mark, or they don't do it.
Yeah. Okay, like I want to know, like apart from peer assessment, could you talk about some other techniques that you use in your classes, to promote collaboration?
So, I mean, in my courses, there's always a fairly significant lab component. So which is half of the course is basically hands-on lab, like experiential learning type things that are integrated with the lecture component. And that's really an opportunity for students to work on questions together, help each other learn together. So I think that I would say that's the major component where they can do that. With respect to Critic, I actually let them work together on the assignments. I just always make it sure, because you can't really avoid that. Like I think, and I encourage them, because I think it's important that they can try to solve problems together. I just always make sure they know that they have to submit their own work. So they can work together on the question, but what they actually submit has to be their own response. And so that's sort of like, usually the quality is pretty high, I would say, of the submissions. The grades are fairly high. But I think that's a price worth paying, because again, it's not so much about the grade, it's for them to really go through the process. And so them collaborating on the questions will help them to basically provide a better quality answer, so to speak.
Okay. Professor Armour?
My course is a little different because it is an asynchronous online. Collaboration is not really an element of the course. This is more about sort of independent and self-paced study, so that isn't something I pull in. I also find at the first year level, collaboration tends to devolve very quickly into copying your friend's work. So I've tended to avoid that, particularly on the online format. So it's a little bit different in my course, just because of the nature of the material and the nature of the students I'm teaching.
Okay. And I think we briefly touched upon grading disputes. Could you tell us about the types of grading disputes that you faced in your classes, and how do you resolve them?
Should I go ahead again?
Yeah.
Or? Okay, sounds good. Sorry. So yeah, no, I mean, the grading disputes are important really, because the students need to know that they can actually dispute a grade. So I think it's important for them to know that they have that possibility, and it gives them, it like I said earlier, it kind of puts them a little bit more at ease that they know that they can do that. So I actually encourage them to dispute the grade, because I want them to know that if they're really unhappy with what they received, that we will take that seriously and look at it. I was quite surprised to see that it wasn't excessive. That was sort of my main concern originally, that there would just be a huge amount of work for me to go through grading disputes. And what I found, what's happening is that initially I get a fair amount of disputes, which then drops almost exponentially. So I tend to have, after the third assignments, I have very, very few disputes, because I think students just understand how the system works and they get used to it. And so that seems to be working really well. In terms of the types of disputes, I find there's sort of two groups. I would say there's some that are really honest issues that students have, where they just kind of think they weren't properly graded, or the assessor really missed something. And so I deal with those usually by just looking at what they said and then adjusting the grade. And there's very few where students just kind of throw their hands in the air and make comments that are not correct, especially if you look at what they produced. The answer that they produced is just not very good. And then I usually try to explain it to them, to sort of so that they can improve the next time.
Okay.
Yeah, the other way I've also used the grading dispute. One of the problems in first year is you get a lot of cut and paste. So I have students, I tell them, if you see something like that, flag it, because they can either flag inappropriate comments or they can put it in the disputes. So I'd say a certain number of my disputes are actually students flagging, I marked this one student's assessment and it seems to be all cut and paste. Do you want to check it? And it makes it easy for me to find it. So I've used it that way. There are some legitimate disputes too, where somebody's missed something. I've never really had a problem with inappropriate comments, but in first year, the one comment I get in, I'd probably say about half the disputes, is I worked really hard and I think I deserve a better mark. And then I have to go explaining to them that it's not about how hard you work, it's about the quality of the answer you produce. You could have produced a great answer in 20 minutes. I don't know that. That's irrelevant. It's how good a quality of answer you produce. It's not how hard you worked on it. It's not how long you worked on it. It's not how good you think it is. It's what the instructor thinks it is, and how your peers assess it against the rubric. And this is a really rude shock for, I think, some first year students, to suddenly realize that how hard you work, working hard can give you a better grade, but working hard alone doesn't give you a good grade. And it's something that kind of shocks some of them, but it's a reality that some people can do really good work in a really short amount of time, but how hard you worked is not really something you're graded on.
Thank you for that very candid answer. I'm gonna, we have one more question here. I think you both touched upon this as well, students getting better as peer evaluation, better as peer evaluators as they progress through the course, and how it impacts their quality of the work that they have submitted. Is there anything else you would like to add to this?
I mean, I think I just want to reiterate how it improved the long answer questions on the final exam. I kind of use that really as a training tool almost, to make sure that they are not just in terms of, the writing style, but really the content of that they think deeply about a problem, and not just sort of, provide a bullet point list of something that they think might be the right answer, but they really think deeply about a question. And I think it did improve. I mean, when we do the final exam, we have usually 2 long answer questions on the final exam and we grade them all. And I would say the quality improved because of that. So it was in that sense, but that's also how I set up my questions. I go, that's how I chose to use Critic specifically.
And it's like I said, I'd like to reiterate, I think it's the soft skill aspect of learning to write, learning to put their thoughts together in an organized fashion so someone else can understand them. I mean, this is a point I have tried for years to get across to my students. It doesn't matter if your answer is right, if you're not writing it out clearly so myself or the TAs or your peers can understand it, it doesn't matter, right? It also has to be clearly communicated. So in my rubrics, communication is always a bit of it. Citation is another big issue for first-year students. Some come in with a really good understanding of how to cite. Others are slightly clueless. So that's another thing that I have them in there. And those are skills that apply to many different courses. So because I'm sort of a gen ed course, I'm trying to get the science into them and a good understanding of science, but build up some of these other skills too through the Critic, which I think is a really useful way to go about it.
Great. Thank you for that. I'm going to quickly go through your activities that you have. So I think this one is yours, Professor Armour.
Yep.
So yeah, did you want to quickly go through this?
This is from my course that's basically an introductory geology course for non-science majors. I think I've heard it referred to as rocks for jocks occasionally, but so we've talked about, I talked about the ocean and ocean geology. So now I talked about all these kind of structures, like gone over what they are and how they form. So now I tell them to find a specific example, like find a picture, read about a specific example of one of these. They have to tell me where it is. They have to tell me, like going back to the lecture material, what the local geological setting and how it formed then, how it's likely to change over time, and then putting it in context of, is it a navigation hazard? Is it a haven for underwater life? Everything. And this isn't meant to be a long answer. This is just meant to be sort of 200 to 300 words and whatever citations they have found. So it's just a simple writing activity where they're taking something they've learned about, and they now actually have to go and find a specific example and kind of apply what they've learned in sort of describing their specific example.
And I also have the detailed rubric here for our audience to see. I worked very hard on this rubric with an educational specialist as I was designing all my online courses. And I use exactly the same rubric for every assignment and for the major project. Now, I don't necessarily use all 4 categories for every assignment. And I change the weighting from assignment to assignment, but I use the same standard rubric so they get a sense of what I am looking for. So this is the overall rubric, and then I give them some more detailed things I want to see in the assignment. For this one, I use these 4 categories. In another one, I may not use the sort of empathy and creativity if it doesn't apply. If I'm having them summarize an article, I may not include the information literacy because you're reading an article, there's no aspect of citation there. So it's like I said, this is also something I'm very, very conscious of. I have one rubric I use for everything, all the assignments, and then for the major project as well. So they've learned to sort of understand what we are looking for, and it's very consistent, which I think for the first year students is really, really important, that they become to understand what the expectations are and how they're supposed to grade and what are the things we should be looking at, right? I just wanted to show a couple of other slides where our audience can see how the evaluation stage looks. So this is the professor view, so they can see the name of the students, which I've hidden right now. But as a student, it just comes up as anonymous evaluation 1, anonymous creator 1, anonymous creator 2. And here, like you could see, there is a qualitative as well as a quantitative, feedback, that evaluation that the student has given to this person's submission. And also wanted to show another example of another student which was instructor graded. So I'm guessing this is one of your TAs who's graded this assignment. So the student is able to get this like not just get their peers evaluation, but they're also able to get their instructor's evaluation if the instructor chooses to do so. And this is the FLAS stage, which is the feedback on feedback stage. Again, this is a qualitative as well as a quantitative feedback that students give. So there is a scale here which tells them how motivational the feedback was and how critical the feedback was. And just a one-line comment, or how much ever they want to go in detail, to express what they felt about the evaluations that they received. So that's one example. I have an example from your course, Professor Hyland. Would you like to delve a little bit delve into this activity?
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, this is the first assignment, so I keep it relatively simple in terms of the literature that they're supposed to use. I give them actually all the information, like the links, so they don't have to do like a search, versus in subsequent assignments, they have to do a little different literature search themselves. Again, it's a third-year course, so the questions are a bit more advanced. And I think I try to explain the objective very clearly, like what is actually the point of this, and this is kind of copied in each assignment. So this is the same blurb like that I try to provide. And then with the instructions, what I try to do. So in this case, it's, for example, about stem cell differentiation, and I really try to touch on sort of two aspects that are important. So the first aspect is, what is it? How does it work? Etc. And then the second aspect is I try to integrate it with another part of the discipline. So in this case, it's how could fitness shape, for example? So how could these things change over evolutionary time? So to really get them to think deeply about how would this actually work, like in natural selection. And I think that's something that is, again, these are difficult questions. They're not even clearly answerable oftentimes, but it's like thinking about them gives you a better understanding about how the system actually works, how evolution works in the context of development. So this is sort of a good example for how I can basically make the students really think more deeply about these more complex issues that are really difficult to do in lecture or even in lab exercises, like, because they need to actually spend the time reading the information carefully and then kind of integrating them themselves. I think that's kind of the key point. With respect to the rubric, so if you go one further, the way I structure the rubric is that I clearly separate grammar, spelling, things like that from the content. I think that's really important because students could really kind of jump in when they evaluate peers and say, well, this is just terribly written, and give it a bad grade. So I try to keep that separate. I also, especially things like grammar and organization, I try to kind of judge them binary. It's like either satisfactory or not, right? Like it's not, so that they don't go into too much detail. But then for the conceptual understanding, I try to differentiate a lot more into different levels. And I think the most important thing that Mary hasn't said yet is that, or that applies to mine, to my class, is that I really target the 70%, 75% as sort of, so they do everything that they're asked to do, they get a 70%, and everything above that is exceptional. And so if they really want to get the 80%, the 90%, they have to go, and I tell them that too, they have to go above and beyond. And this is a system we use generally in lab reports and essays, because otherwise you get very, very steep grade inflations in these systems where you end up with 95 averages. And it is really, oftentimes my questions, they require some creativity, they require some level of integration, and it really helps the students to think like they can answer the question basically well, and you can see the level 2 is sort of demonstrates, complete understanding. Like that's sort of the baseline, but that would only give them like a 75, or 76, depending on how I lay it out. And then everything above and beyond that is really what gives them the higher grades.
And have you seen this before peer assessment? Have you seen any difference in the kind of grades that they get? Or do you think, what I'm trying to say is, like, with peer assessment, are you able to see any noticeable difference in the type of grades that they are getting?
I think the critic grade is generally higher than what they would do otherwise. And again, I think this is just kind of a price I'm willing to pay for them actually learning something in the process. So I think it is sort of like, because you have to just complete it. It's not, the grades tend to be higher than. So I said earlier that for me it replaces the midterm exam. And because they can stretch it out throughout the semester, so it's not so much pressure in the moment. So compared to the midterm exam, the grade is higher. That's for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. And this is again another example of evaluation. The student has given a very concise evaluation, and again, like a detailed, like a quantitative evaluation as well, based on the rubrics that was provided. And this is the last feedback on feedback stage, where the student has given again a qualitative as well as a quantitative feedback, and kind of closing the loop. And then, then everything lies with the instructor to finalize the grade and resolve grading disputes, and then, kind of just, complete that activity. So I think we're over time now, but we did have a lot of discussion during the presentation. But John, did you have any more questions to ask our panelists? Sorry, didn't want to put you on the spot,
no,
but
yeah, no.
Sorry, you're breaking up.
Thanks. Thank you both very much for this. I appreciate it. I'm teaching again.
Sorry, I think internet is not our friend today. Yeah, but if you would like to connect with us after this, please feel free to connect with us. We have, I think we covered pretty much all the audience questions that were already asked. And thank you so much to our panelists, Professor Armour and Professor Hyland, to share your insights and share your best practices on peer assessment.